Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a world where brutality was the key to survival? Where raw strength and combat skills determined the fate of entire nations? Today we're going to embark on a journey to explore some of the most fascinating and brutal civilizations of antiquity, uncovering the mysteries surrounding them and revealing how their ferocity shaped the world we know. Imagine the Persians, dominating vast territories with relentless military discipline and devastating campaigns. Their rise to power wasn't just about strategy, but also sheer brute force. On the shores of the Mediterranean, the Carthaginians engaged in relentless wars against Rome, using war elephants to crush their opponents in epic battles that left deep scars in history. Traveling to the steppes of Central Asia, we find the Scythians, master horse archers whose brutality was legendary. Their swift and deadly raids spread terror among their enemies, demonstrating that speed and ferocity were their main weapons. On the Iberian Peninsula, the Iberians and the Lusitanians fiercely resisted foreign domination, employing guerrilla tactics and deadly ambushes against the Roman invaders, proving that brutality could also be used to defend freedom. Further north, the Picts of Scotland, known for their body paint and savage warfare tactics, defended their lands with fierce and relentless determination. The Celts, scattered across Europe, not only engaged in bloody rituals, but also in brutal confrontations as they expanded their territories and influence. Their battles were as fierce as their beliefs. In the Balkans, the Thracians were fearsome warriors, renowned for their ferocity in battle and their hand-to-hand combat traditions, which left few survivors. The Germans, whose migrating tribes challenged Roman power, were known for their plundering and destructive campaigns, where mercy was rarely offered. Finally, we come to the Byzantines, heirs to the Eastern Roman Empire. They used both diplomacy and brutal force to keep their empire united in the face of constant threats. Their warfare tactics and state policies were as complex as they were ruthless, showing that brutality could be both a tool of power and a necessity for survival. These ancient peoples, with their histories marked by bloody battles, human sacrifices, and ruthless military strategies, show us that human history was often written in blood. By exploring these civilizations, we gain a better understanding of the world we live in and the fundamental nature of the struggle for survival. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Stay until the end to learn about the brutality and peculiarities of each civilization. Share with your friends and leave a comment about which civilization you found most interesting. The Persians, one of the most powerful and influential empires of antiquity, began their rise under the leadership of Cyrus the Great. Their expansion was swift and relentless, with Cyrus showcasing a unique blend of military strategy and brutality that would secure his dominance. Cyrus's campaigns were marked by prolonged sieges and bloody battles, where prisoners often faced terrible fates, such as mass executions. Cyrus's successor, Darius V, continued the Persian Empire's expansion. He dealt with internal rebellions with an iron fist, crushing dissent with brutal force. Darius was known for his severe punishments, including crucifixions and mutilations, intended to serve as a deterrent to those who dared challenge his power. The construction of his capital, Persepolis, involved the use of forced labor under inhumane conditions, demonstrating the Persians' willingness to use brutality to achieve their grand objectives. The Persians were also known for their psychological warfare tactics. During the invasion of Greece, Xerxes III, Darius's son, brought a massive army, including fierce warriors from various parts of the empire, such as the Immortals, an elite unit feared for its effectiveness and brutality on the battlefield. Cities that resisted Persian conquest often faced total destruction, as happened with Babylon, which was sacked and its defenders massacred. The Persians' ability to combine diplomacy and terror made them a formidable force. They used propaganda to instill fear in their enemies and ensured loyalty through brutal demonstrations of power. Public decapitations and displays of mutilated bodies were common, serving as grim warnings to anyone considering resisting Persian rule. Persian brutality was not just a tool of conquest, but also a means of maintaining order within their vast empire. They enforced a strict legal code where crimes were punished extremely harshly, including torture and execution. This approach ensured that law and order were maintained, but also instilled deep fear among their subjects, solidifying Persian control over a vast and diverse territory. Now let's cross the Mediterranean and dive into the world of the Carthaginians, a civilization renowned for both its commerce and its brutality in warfare. Founded by Phoenician settlers, Carthage quickly became a commercial powerhouse, but its true legacy is marked by the bloody conflicts it waged, primarily against Rome. The Carthaginians were masters of naval warfare, and their navy was one of the most powerful in the ancient world. They did not hesitate to use brutal tactics to secure victory. During the First Punic War, naval battles were fierce and relentless, with soldiers using hooks and grappling irons to board and massacre enemy crews. Carthaginian victories in many of these battles were secured by their willingness to fight to the last drop of blood. However, Carthaginian brutality is perhaps best known through the campaigns of Hannibal Barca. During the Second Punic War, Hannibal led one of the most audacious attacks in history, crossing the Alps with an army that included war elephants. The battles that followed were terrifying examples of total war. At Cannae, Hannibal encircled and annihilated a much larger Roman army, killing tens of thousands of Roman soldiers in a single day. The carnage was so extensive that the battlefield was covered in corpses, and the local river was stained red with spilled blood. The Carthaginians not only faced Rome, but also dealt brutally with internal rebellions and dissent. When their colonies or controlled territories showed signs of revolt, the Carthaginian response was swift and merciless. Rebel leaders were severely punished, often through public crucifixions or mass executions, to set an example and deter future uprisings. Carthage's religious rituals also had a brutal side. The Carthaginians were known for practicing human sacrifices, a practice that horrified the Romans and other contemporary peoples. Children were offered to the gods in ceremonies aimed at gaining divine favor during times of crisis. These brutal practices left a lasting mark on Carthage's historical image, portraying it as a society where violence and sacrifice were integral parts of life. Even in its downfall, Carthage's brutality was evident. During the Third Punic War, the Romans besieged Carthage for 3 years. The city, already starving and desperate, resisted fiercely. When the Romans finally breached the defenses, they destroyed Carthage down to its foundations, massacring its inhabitants and selling the survivors into slavery. The destruction of Carthage was complete, a final testament to the brutality that both the Carthaginians and their enemies were capable of. Now let's travel to the vast steppes of Central Asia and meet the Scythians, a nomadic civilization known for both their equestrian skills and relentless brutality. The Scythians were master horse archers, and their swift and deadly raids terrified their enemies, making them one of the most feared peoples of their time. The Scythians lived in a warrior society where brutality was not just a necessity, but a way of life. From an early age, Scythian youth were trained to ride and fight, learning to wield the bow with deadly precision while galloping at full speed. These skills allowed the Scythians to conduct lightning-fast attacks, surprising and devastating their opponents before they had a chance to defend themselves. One of the most brutal aspects of Scythian culture was their treatment of enemies. The Scythians had a custom of decapitating their foes and using the skulls as drinking cups. This practice, besides serving as a war trophy, was a way to instill fear and respect among their enemies. The heads of the defeated were displayed as symbols of power and victory, a grim warning to those who dared to confront the Scythians. Human sacrifices were also part of Scythian religious rituals. They believed that blood offerings to the gods ensured protection and success in battle. Prisoners of war and even members of their own tribes could be sacrificed in bloody ceremonies, reinforcing the idea that brutality was a sacred and necessary element of their culture. The battle against the Persian Empire under Darius III was an example of Scythian ferocity. Despite Darius having a numerically superior army, the Scythians used guerrilla tactics to wear down the Persians, avoiding direct confrontations and striking unexpectedly and lethally. Brutal ambushes and the destruction of Persian supplies demonstrated the effectiveness and brutality of Scythian warfare, forcing Darius to retreat without ever achieving a decisive victory. Another example of Scythian brutality can be seen in their interactions with the Greeks. Herodotus's accounts describe how the Scythians treated their prisoners with unimaginable cruelty, often torturing them before executing them. This reputation for savagery led many Greek cities to prefer paying tribute rather than facing the Scythians in battle. The Scythians, with their nomadic lifestyle and relentless warriors, left a lasting mark on human history. Their ability to combine speed, surprise, and brutality made them fearsome adversaries, and their often shocking cultural practices ensured that their name would be remembered with a mix of admiration and terror. Continuing our journey to the Iberian Peninsula, we encounter the Iberians, an ancient civilization known for its fierce reputation. Renowned for their resistance and brutality, the Iberians stood out not only for their combat skills, but also for their ruthless tactics and war practices. The Iberians were formidable warriors, and their brutality in combat was well documented by contemporary historians. During the Punic Wars, the Iberians were key allies of the Carthaginians against Rome. Their fierce resistance and guerrilla tactics forced the Romans to fight in unfamiliar and challenging terrain, facing ambushes and surprise attacks. In many battles, the Iberians used their combat skills to inflict maximum destruction, often attacking Roman soldiers mercilessly. The Iberian strategies were as brutal as they were effective. They were known for their swift ambushes and lightning strikes, using the rugged terrain of the Iberian Peninsula to their advantage. These attacks often resulted in carnage, with the Iberians showing little mercy to captured enemies. On several occasions, captured Roman soldiers were executed or publicly displayed to deter other foes. The Iberians were also notorious for their brutal methods of resistance. During their fight against the Roman invasion, their tactics included nighttime raids and deadly traps. Skirmishes and direct confrontations were often accompanied by brutality, such as torture and summary executions of prisoners. The Iberians' determination to protect their lands led to a prolonged and bloody struggle against the Romans, who only managed to suppress the resistance after years of intense warfare. In addition to their ferocity in battle, the Iberians had cultural practices that also reflected a certain brutality. Their religious ceremonies often involved human sacrifices, where prisoners of war were offered to the gods in bloody rituals. These sacrifices were not just acts of devotion, but also a way to intimidate adversaries and assert the power of Iberian leaders. The brutality of the Iberians was not confined to the battlefield. It also manifested in their governance practices. Iberian leaders used force and violence to maintain order and suppress any form of dissent within their tribes. Punishments for crimes were severe and often cruel, reflecting the ruthless nature of Iberian society. Now let's turn our attention to the Thracians, an ancient people who lived in the Balkan region, known for their warrior traditions and brutal practices. The Thracians were a warrior civilization whose battles and rituals demonstrated impressive brutality. The Thracians were famous for their ferocity in combat. Their warfare strategy involved the use of heavy weapons, such as double-edged swords and long spears, and their hand-to-hand combat skills were feared by their enemies. In battles, Thracian warriors were known for their brutal and effective techniques, often devastating enemy ranks with intense and relentless attacks. In addition to their brutality in battle, the Thracians were notorious for their cultural practices and bloody rituals. They performed religious ceremonies that included human sacrifices, often offering prisoners of war and even members of their own tribes to the gods in bloody rituals. These sacrifices were not only a form of devotion, but also a public demonstration of power and a means of maintaining order within Thracian society. The Thracians were also known for their unusual and brutal funeral practices. In some cases, the warrior class and important leaders were buried with their belongings and sacrificed servants, demonstrating a belief that violence and power extended beyond life. These burials were often marked by elaborate rituals involving the sacrifice of animals and, on some occasions, even humans. During the wars with the Romans, the brutality of the Thracians was clearly evident. Their attacks against Roman troops included ambushes and surprise attacks that resulted in high numbers of deaths and destruction. Thracian resistance was so fierce that the Romans often had to use containment tactics to deal with the constant threat from the Thracians. Campaigns against them were characterized by brutal confrontations, where the goal was often the complete annihilation of the enemy. The Thracians also left a mark on history with their legends and stories. Herodotus, the Greek historian, described the Thracians as a people of wild and brutal warriors whose battles and cultural practices impressed and terrorized neighboring peoples. This image of brutality was a central part of Thracian identity and helped solidify their place in history as a people whose strength and ferocity were unparalleled. Throughout this journey through the history of civilizations that marked antiquity with their brutality and power, we have seen how these peoples not only shaped the world they lived in, but also left legacies of strength and cruelty that echo to this day. From the Persians with their relentless tactics and terror strategies that ensured control over vast territories, to the Carthaginians, whose brutality in war and intense religious practices demonstrated a formidable and often terrifying strength. We observe the Scythians, whose warrior skills and cruel practices left a trail of destruction wherever they went, revealing a people whose brutality was both a tool of conquest and a means of maintaining internal order. Each of these civilizations used brutality as an essential component of their identity and success. Whether through ruthless military strategies, cruel cultural and religious practices, or severe punishments to maintain discipline, they demonstrated that violence was often an integral part of their existence and power. These stories not only show us the dark and brutal aspects of ancient civilizations, but also remind us of the complexity and intensity with which power and force were wielded in the past. They are stories that make us reflect on the nature of power, violence, and resistance throughout human history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient civilizations and their brutal practices, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Stay tuned, as we have many more fascinating and revealing stories to share with you. Share with your friends and leave a comment about which civilization or historical theme you'd like to see in our upcoming videos. Until next time.